Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
What is the most memorable case of you messed with the wrong person that you've witnessed? My dad was a lawyer growing up, so I've never once heard him raise his voice. He was much better at calmly dissecting every argument to the point where you always feel really dumb for even having an opinion by the end. My high school dean, on the other hand, was an old-school retired military drill sergeant and was no stranger to screaming matches. Since the school was a private prep school, we had a strict dress code and had to pay tuition each year. One morning I had put on the wrong pair of shoes, a gray pair instead of a fully black pair, and hadn't noticed until I got to school. None of my teachers cared whatsoever about the blunder, as I was still in full uniform and on time for classes. Unfortunately, I had my lunch period with the dean in the room, and the second he noticed what I was wearing, he dragged me to his office to send me home. His first question was, "Should I call your mother or your father?" I knew exactly who I wanted this jerk to get an earful of. I asked him to call my dad, who abruptly answered with a, "What? I'm in a mediation. Can't this be an email?" The dean immediately took the phone off speaker and began to yell at my father, telling him how disrespectful I was being by failing to comply with the uniform. To this day, I never learned what exactly my dad said to cause my dean to go so dead silent for such an unending period of time. If I had to guess, he must have explained how idiotic the dean had been by forcing me to miss class time, calling my dad and wasting his client's time, and stupid enough to think that my dad gave the slightest stuff about what color shoes I wore. Next, I heard the phone line go dead, and the dean slowly hung up the device. He looked up at me and very calmly said, "Go back to class," which for me was lunch with him, so it was an insanely awkward walk back to the cafeteria. I could barely keep a straight face, lol. My father and I were at the mall near his place eating at the food court and saw a guy, early 20s, get into an argument with an older man in a wheelchair, and the guy took the man's food out of his hands and threw it on the ground and screamed at him for bumping his table with his wheelchair. My father calmly stood up, walked over to the guy who was still screaming at the frightened elderly man and put him in a chokehold and dragged him to the balcony area and asked him if he would rather apologize and reimburse the man or if he would enjoy a 25-foot drop so he can know how hard it is to maneuver a wheelchair in a packed food court. The man quickly shut up and apologized. I think the best obliteration I've personally seen was at a bar. There was a bouncer there that everyone called Tank, an absolute unit of a man, one of the biggest guys I've ever seen. He's also a super nice man. A couple seats down from me was a guy who was showing signs of having a few too many, so the bartender cut him off. Guy starts getting irate, yelling at the bartender that he's fine, and this is bad, while barely being able to make a coherent sentence. In comes Tank. He politely asks him to leave, even says, "Hey, come on, buddy, that's enough." Guy wasn't having it. Drunky thought the best course of action now was to spit on the 6 feet 5 inches, 300+ pound bouncer. So naturally, Tank puts his Goliath hand on the side of the guy's head and in one terribly slow-looking motion, throws him to the ground. The guy got thrown with enough force that he did a backflip, and it looked like Tank was just swatting a fly. He then picked him up by the shirt with one arm and carried him out of the bar like a misbehaving toddler. And on that night, I was reassured never to look at the Tank. My father had to go to court with the bank because they were stealing his money. It was a long process, but my father won and the bank had to pay for everything. I'm talking about thousands of dollars. They had to give him all the money, pay for both lawyers, and give him some compensation money for all the problems. When I turned 18, I didn't know it. He barely told me anything about his life or business, and I went to the same bank and made an account. They did the same to me with $200. I asked my father if it was normal, and if signed any condition that I didn't read. He got super mad. We walked together to the bank, and when the director saw us getting his face changed, I got my money back and a letter from the central office of the bank apologizing. Felt good to see that guy getting down the pants so easy. My old roommate got super drunk at a party I took him to with a bunch of my friends. He tried to kiss a girl without her consent, and then got aggressive when she pushed him away and called for help. I was in the house when a friend of mine came in telling me that my friend was about to get crushed by her 6 feet 4 inches friend. I ran outside. This man is massive and is holding my roommate back and telling him to back off or he is going to get held up. I get between them and beg the man not to kill my roommate, and if he would be so kind, spare me too. He was a super nice guy and allowed me to de-escalate and get my roommate removed from the situation. My roommate starts calling everyone pussies and threatening people as I am trying to get him away. He is so drunk he is telling me he loves me, but is then yelling racist stuff and being a total weird. Just as I get him about halfway towards my car, my other friend runs outside, tackles him, and pummels the ever-loving hell out of my roommate. He just blasts him and walks away. I can do nothing but watch. Just then a neighbor says that the police are on their way, and I finally get my roommate up. We get to within 10 feet of my car, and the owner/host of the part comes out and tells us both how uncool it was to start this mess. I apologize profusely, as it was terribly uncool. My roommate is now on the warpath again, and goes up to the man yelling at him and pushing his chest. Man takes his hand, bends his thumb back, and flips him on the ground. My roommate howls in pain. The host then asks, "Are you done?" My roommate says that he is and proceeds to lay on the ground yelling, "Shoryuken," for the better part of 10 minutes. I got him in the car seconds before the police arrived and safely home. He passed out in the car, but I got him home and into bed. At 1 a.m., he wakes me up asking why he is all beat up and his hand is swollen. He was threatening to sue everyone there, but I told him he shouldn't because he beat the crap out of 3 people, which of course did not happen. All in all, it was a standard weeknight in my early 20s. I didn't witness it, but my friend was the best swimmer on his high school varsity team, but his coach was a total ass. I don't remember the exact details, but he was sick from what I remember and told her he couldn't make practice, but she being a bitch told him he has to do it anyway, or she'd tell his parents he was skipping practice. So, he did and almost threw up in the pool. There was a lot more confrontation, but that was the big one. As the season progresses, he's carrying their team in all their wins, and they get to state because of him. The day before state, he quit the swim team. I was walking on 33rd Street right off Ditmars Boulevard in Astoria. This white homeless man was walking around blurting out all sort of stupid stuff. A black Escalade drove by slowly, and I guess there were 2 black men inside. The homeless man shouted, "You are niggers." Just like that. No provocation. Not responding to anything the men said. He just shouted that at them. The car stopped. The guy at the passenger side of the car said, "Excuse me?" The homeless man doubled down. "I said you're niggers." I hear the car door open, and the black guy comes out. He stood at about 5 feet 9 inches, but he must have been, no exaggeration, over 300 pounds, and it wasn't fat. This guy could have been a linebacker or something. I remember his shoulders being the size of my head. He slowly walked up to the homeless man, just trying to intimidate him, and asked him, "What did you say to me?" The homeless guy tripled down. "I said you're a nigger. You're a nigger." The guy grabbed the homeless man by the shirt and collar, lifted him up like an outdoor folding chair, and drove the homeless guy's face into the front bumper of a parked car. The homeless man's face was literally inside the front bumper of the parked car. Then they got up, went back into the car, and drove off. I called 911. The ambulance came and the EMT asked him, "What happened?" The homeless guy, covered in blood, with stars and birds metaphorically spinning around his head, looked at the EMT and said, "Bad niggers." It wasn't funny, but I couldn't stop laughing internally. But honestly, the guy gave him like 2 chances to be like, "I said gold diggers." I'm sure they give you a tough time with that sweetest ride, man. Okay, so not my own story, but something my high school physics teacher told us. His brother was a Marine with a wild temper. On top of that, he did MMA fighting in his free time because he just liked to kick ass. So, he's on a date with his wife, right? When they go outside, he finds 3 guys around his car, drunk off their asses, with one guy taking a piss on his car. Naturally, he's a bit upset, but he restrains himself, tells them to get away from his car. Instead, one decides to punch him. As he actually found out later, this drunk actually broke his jaw. This only served to make him angrier. He turns back around and proceeds to kick the ever-loving stuff out of all three guys at once before taking his wife home. Apparently, they were far worse off than he was. Also, he didn't even realize his jaw was broken for about 3 days. No violence was involved in this one, but the smackdown was nuclear in consequence and little more than a whisper in delivery. I'm sitting in a business meeting. It's related to a very, very expensive project for a subcontractor of the UK government. At this point in my career, I'm a consultant that gets farmed out to various businesses as a subject matter expert. As a result, we occasionally encounter similar people from rival firms on joint projects. Consultant from the other company was the offender in this particular scenario. We'll call him A. A had been slacking a lot and had been seen leaving early, generally rubbing people up the wrong way, and was not worth the hourly rate that was being forked out for his time. This guy was the kind to blame absolutely everyone else anytime he was accused of something. It's worth noting that a lot of the time, the kind of work I do is done remotely or by a long string of teleconferences, so you could spend months working with people and never meet them face to face. The meeting begins, there is a roundup of progress and a few key deliverables have been delayed, which is going to incur a late fee on the client if it doesn't get done on time. The project A has been working on has 3 people, including him, that are there to do the same work and support. The questioning turns to A as to why we're late on a few documents. Proceeds to claim he has done everything in his power to move things along. Starts giving a long string of excuses and making claims for things he has done that were under his remit. It's at this point that A decided to start blaming the project manager, PM, for being, and I quote, a complete waste of space among other things. What A doesn't know is that the project manager is not a consultant, and he's very high up in the management chain of the client company. More importantly, A has failed to realize that the project manager he is blaming all of these things for is sitting across from him, at the right hand of the person in charge of this area of the business. PM proceeds to open his laptop and, in what I can only describe as a total stroke of genius, lets it continue talking for a good 5 minutes about how terrible the PM is, how he never responds to work submissions or listens to him. During this 5-minute, PM clicks away a few times and moves the laptop in front of the top dog, TD. The look on TD's face is one I can only describe as an annoyed smile. TD then asks a load of specific questions which, unbeknown to A, relate to emails and paper trails that are sitting in front of TD on the laptop. There is a moment of silence when A has finished speaking. TD then turns to PM and says, "Well, let's see what PM has to say for himself," and points with a pin towards PM. "A when as white as a sheet. I've seen dead people with more color in their skin." PM proceeded to spend 20 minutes reading out emails, documents, and various other bits of evidence, including a chat log of the company internal messaging service between A and another member of A's company, which contains some less than professional comments about the client. At this point, you can clearly see that A is looking for an escape route, and by now he's legitimately considering diving out of the 4th floor window. Just when I thought it couldn't get any better, TD phones the commercial contact of A's company, puts it on loudspeaker, and explains to the guy why they won't be requiring A's services anymore. Not only is a total prisoner during this, but he also has to listen to his commercial manager make apologies and go on about how he's in deep trouble. Many years ago, I worked with this guy who was basically a 6 feet 6 inches pencil. He was super nice and chill. He had a really dreadful day at work, so a few of us decided to buy him a few beers after work. We get to the bar, and this drunk man was in the process of getting kicked out. Anyway, drunk guy is like 5 feet 5 inches, or so with the typical Napoleon complex. Starts going on about how my coworker must think he's so tough just because he's tall. He keeps moving to get up in friend's face. All the while my coworker is like, just leaving me alone. Guy, I've had a dreadful day and not in the mood for this. Like 5 or 6 times he says this when little man goes to double hand shove my friend. My friend must have hit the guy at least 4 times before the drunk even hit the ground. It happened in maybe 2 seconds. He hunkers down and puts this drunk in the recovery position and then steps over him and into the bar. Drunk should have walked away but didn't listen and got what he deserved. Careful being a toughie because you never know how a person's going to react or if you're giving them an excuse to work off their rage. Was at a bush party when a man we called B-Mac and his friends show up. You always knew B-Mac was in town because everything was a bit more chaotic. Municipal damage, rise of stolen vehicles, influx of 16-year-olds thinking they're gangster running weed and coke. Besides having unhealthy habits, I assure you that B-Mac was a good man who got addicted to drugs early on in life and was gifted with an iron face. At this part, one watched a guy book it out of left field and punch him in the face as hard as he could, then proceed to elbow him over and over in the chin 5 times, in which B-Mac just glared at him the whole time, barely flinching. He grabs this man by the top of the head and squeezes his temples, asking him if he was done, then forced him to sit on a log. Seeing what he's done to other people, this guy got off lucky. It's a good thing he was one of the few people he respected. I miss him though. Past all his shenanigans, he always had respect for people who he felt had an actual pure heart in a tough situation. Was at a bush party when a man we called B-Mac and his friends show up. You always knew B-Mac was in town because everything was a bit more chaotic. Municipal damage, rise of stolen vehicles, influx of 16-year-olds thinking they're gangster running weed and coke. Besides having unhealthy habits, I assure you that B-Mac was a good man who got addicted to drugs early on in life and was gifted with an iron face. At this part, one watched a guy book it out of left field and punch him in the face as hard as he could, then proceed to elbow him over and over in the chin 5 times, in which B-Mac just glared at him the whole time, barely flinching. He grabs this man by the top of the head and squeezes his temples, asking him if he was done, then forced him to sit on a log. Seeing what he's done to other people, this guy got off lucky. It's a good thing he was one of the few people he respected. I miss him though. Past all his shenanigans, he always had respect for people who he felt had an actual pure heart in a tough situation. Only fight I got into in high school. I remember it clearly because it will be one of my greatest memories. I used to have anger issues as a kid growing up, bullied a lot in school for my size, bigger guy, but it mellowed as I got older. Junior year, I'm sitting in the cafeteria before school playing Yu-Gi-Oh with friends. We were the quiet nerds. This greasy kid, think the friend from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, who has been messing with me all year, just picking and poking, making sure not to escalate things to a fight, comes up and shoves my shoulder, talking it. Finally, had enough as he walked away. I calmly laid my cards down and said, "I'll be right back." Shoved the kid. He took a swing. I put him in a headlock to de-escalate the situation like I had trained myself to do when I got into a fight. As I spin him around, he takes a swing at me. I black out. Not from being struck, but just anger at this point. All I remember was ducking a punch, and the lunch lady ending it by just putting a hand on my shoulder. I heard the bell ring, got up off the kid, picked up the lens to my glasses that fell out, and walked to class. I'm sitting in class trying to put the lens in and everyone avoiding me, like usual, when a campus officer walks in looking around. Told him, "Yeah, you are looking for me. Give me a minute, I want to be able to see as I'm walking up the stairs." He walks me up the stairs to the principal's office. The nurse looks me over while the other kid is in the office getting his punishment. The nurse tells me the greasy kid tried digging his nails into my head and asked if I wanted stitches. I went into the principal's office, and he proceeded to show me the video cam footage. Apparently, when I blacked out, I slugged the kid to the ground and was sitting on his chest, bouncing his head off the concrete like a basketball. After that, I, as well as my friends, were pretty well left alone in the morning. Football players used to screw with us, but didn't anymore. A fun fact also turned out to be a superintendent's son. We were on patrol in one of the biggest slums in Baghdad, walking down this little-ass alley full of garbage, and the guy in front of me steps out into a crossroad, looks to his right, and then gets shot right in the chest. I grab him and hill him back behind the wall. One on my Joes behind me says, "Hate this," and steps around the corner, firing his saw and screaming like all the devils of hell are his to command. He emptied a 200-round belt into the 3 Mahdi fighters that were less than 20 feet away. There was so little left I had to fold part of one dude's face back so we could get good photo evidence. When I was a yellow belt in karate, I attended this stage where there were like a few beginners, but mainly other black belts. All grades were welcome, but it really was like 10 to 15 black belts. For brown belts, just 2 yellows and a couple in between. Every night, since it was in France on vacation, we would all eat supper together and the head sensei, A 10th Dan black belt karate master originally from Okinawa told us about a few years back, during one of those stages a couple of years before, when I wasn't there. With the same disproportionate amounts of black belts in the group, during supper, a couple of jocks came by looking for trouble. Needless to say, you do not move with 10 black belts, unless you bring a pistol or a flamethrower. Not a man, but when I was 14 years old in high school, 2012, I was different and I got a lot of stuff for it, but that's not the focus of this story. To set the scene, I was in woodshop class, and I was the safety monitor. I was standing up supervising what people were doing as the teacher was talking. Some people did dumb, dangerous stuff because, 14-year-olds. This one kid had put multiple things in the vice grip on his desk. So, I glared at him. He apparently thought my annoyance was funny, so he just kept doing it, and he started stabbing scissors into the wood with a stuff-eating grin on his face. I said something like, "You better cut it out." He just kept smiling at me and kept acting like an idiot. I was livid and I walked over to him, and I backhanded that disrespectful stuff on the back of his head. It was dead silent in the classroom, and once I realized what I had done, I was horrified, until I looked up at the teacher and I saw that he was smiling. The kid I hit looked shocked and yelled, "Did you just see that?" My teacher just smiled wider and said, "Yeah," and he continued to teach the class. The kid was dead silent and behaved himself for the rest of the period. 4 to 5 years later, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, LOL.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.